When we play video games nowadays, we have certain expectations when it comes to the design of the world. We expect worlds to feel alive and vibrant, full of things to explore, with an abundance of NPCs and other content to interact with around each and every corner. The world is, for lack of a better description, supposed to feel lived in. But what about those games that intentionally choose to do the opposite? I'm not talking about those games that have massive worlds that lack content, but ones where developers choose to craft a hauntingly quiet atmosphere. Ones that present a more subdued experience. These sparsely populated worlds excel in telling stories mostly through the environment, or sometimes in out-of-the-way notes from long-dead characters that maybe we don't even see in-game. Games like these are designed to really immerse the player in the world and craft an atmosphere that makes them feel a specific mood. Sometimes they're meant to give you the melancholy feeling that you're one of the last living things in this world, and sometimes, the creeping dread feeling that you aren't. I genuinely love games or segments from games that have these kind of vibes, and that's the topic of today's video. I'll be exploring some of these empty, derelict, or abandoned worlds, and talking about the general atmosphere and feeling of them, and just why I think aspects of them work so well. So with all of that out of the way, let's journey into the void. This is the atmosphere of empty game worlds. Also, hey, I've got some channel-related announcements at the end of the video if you want to stick around and hear about those. Okay, back to the video. Let's start with the easiest and probably the most famous example of games that have these kind of vibes. Silent Hill. The original Silent Hill basically pioneered the genre of game that some of what I'm looking at today falls into or is inspired by, and to this day is an absolute masterclass in surreal horror atmosphere. For all four of you that don't know about these games, I'll do a quick plot rundown for some context. Silent Hill takes place in the titular Silent Hill. In the first game you play as Harry Mason, who goes to the town on the world's worst vacation with his daughter Cheryl. On the way there, they crash their car and are knocked unconscious, and upon waking up, Harry finds that his daughter is missing, so your mission is to wander through the foggy abandoned streets to find her. That's all we need to know in terms of plot. Let's talk atmosphere. As previously mentioned, the town of Silent Hill consists mostly of empty crumbling streets and abandoned dilapidated buildings. This gives a feeling that the town once had life in it, but is now a decaying corpse of its former self, slowly rotting away, populated only by a sparse few people still here, and some creatures that I'm not entirely sure fit the description of living, but I digress. Places like these are clearly long past their prime, but aren't entirely devoid of life yet. Much like myself. As far as aesthetics go, the fog is the main thing that everyone notes when they talk about this series. What started as a clever way to hide the rendering limitations of the PlayStation 1 quickly became the defining feature of the series and spawned a whole genre of games inspired by the spooky or uncanny style of the graphics. The constant fog and snowfall presents an almost dreamlike setting, blurring the lines between what's real and what isn't, and the overall atmosphere it creates really gives the player the feeling of being alone and isolated in this desolate place. And generally the few things you do encounter here are out to kill you. The town itself is decaying and unwelcoming in nature, perfectly represented by the visuals. All the buildings are cracking, all the fences rusting, there's the occasional blood smear on the ground indicating something sinister happened here. To me it gives the feeling like the town wants to be forgotten. Similarly, the interiors of the buildings with their peeling wallpaper just feel like they're forgotten by time and left to rot. Their inhabitants just left one day, and by the time Harry finds it, well, it's seen better days. This is all compounded by the great use of lighting and sound design. Like you already can't see shit due to the fog, but the darker areas of the map are where the game's lighting truly shines. Get it? The darkness further limits your view to a small light produced by the flashlight, which dials the spooky atmosphere from like a 4 to a 9, not knowing what could be just out of sight. The other key aspect to the empty and spooky atmosphere is the masterfully done soundtrack. When you're not actively in combat or in a cutscene, the only sounds that you can hear aside from your own footsteps are what I can loosely describe as ambient droning and maybe wind noises. It really makes for an atmosphere seeping with dread and unease, and it feels like it was designed to instill a sense of impending doom in the player and keep them on edge while playing. This game is a perfect example of crafting an atmosphere that's meant to unnerve the player, rather than shocking them with outright scares. Not that this game entirely lacks the shocking content, but it takes a backseat to building an atmospheric world first. And while it might not be the best in the series, as people generally agree that Silent Hill 2 takes that spot, its legacy on gaming can't be overstated, and it's remembered today as being one of the best in its genre. The setting and feeling of that foggy abandoned town inspired many games that came after it, and set the bar pretty high when it comes to crafting a world that chooses to quietly unnerve the player rather than outright scaring them, and I just appreciate that approach so much. 2022's Iron Lung has been on my radar for a bit now, and this video seemed like as good excuse as any to finally dive into it. Get it? Dive? Radar? Puns aside, this game is about as empty as it gets. An event known as the Quiet Rapture caused all habitable planets as well as stars to suddenly vanish, leaving only uninhabitable moons and asteroids as the sole celestial bodies in the universe. With only a handful of humans alive on scattered space stations throughout the cosmos and resources starting to run dry, Humanity's been scouring the empty space looking for any remaining resources to rebuild. You play as some unnamed convict sent to investigate a recent phenomenon that's popped up on an uninhabitable moon known as a blood ocean that may or may not contain valuable resources in exchange for your freedom. So your task in this game is to man a makeshift sub known as the Iron Lung into depths it absolutely wasn't designed for, and take pictures of anomalies that might be resources using this fucking Game Boy camera mounted to the front of your sub. Since the sub wasn't designed to handle the crushing pressure of this ocean, you had to be sealed in there. So for the entirety of the game, you're the only person in here, in this claustrophobic nightmare with no view of the outside. The only lifeline you have is a map of the moon, a radar system that warns of objects in proximity of the sub, and a coordinate-based navigation system. The atmosphere of this game is crushingly oppressive and claustrophobic. Also, if you're prone to thalassophobia or megalophobia, the atmosphere of this game will absolutely unnerve you. The fact that you can't see anything outside the sub heightens the fear of the unknown and makes for an almost constant feeling of dread. I think the use of the limited visibility in this game is one of its strongest aspects. There's a very specific type of feeling that it invokes, similar to being afraid of the dark. Not being able to see anything around you really makes for a specifically terrifying atmosphere. While these concepts alone are great, it's the sound design for me that really sets this game in a league all its own. The sounds for this game are masterfully done to complement this overall feeling of being trapped down here. The game itself is quiet. The only noises that you hear most of the time is the occasional dripping of blood through the hull of the sub, and the beeping of your radar when you come too close to a wall, until you reach a certain point. After the first few things have been inspected, the game likes to occasionally throw monstrous ambient noises at you just to toy with the idea that maybe you aren't alone in this ocean. That theory is later proven when you go to take a picture, only to be met with a giant eye staring back at you. The game also likes to use other tricks to build an atmosphere of dread and suspense, like when you're out in a seemingly vast stretch of open ocean and the radar suddenly beeps off the charts like you're about to ram into something colossal. I'm going to spoil the ending now just because it took me by surprise when I first played it, and I think the game is best gone into with no knowledge. It's a short experience and it's cheap, so I recommend you play it for yourself, so if you don't want it spoiled, I'll have a time on screen now to jump to. In the end of the game, you reach the last anomaly to photograph. Quickly running out of oxygen and blood seeping through the cracks, there's at least hope that after this last photo, you can leave with your freedom. As you go to take the final photo, a massive fish creature bursts through the back of the hull, killing you and ending the game. Post-game text shows that neither the wreckage of the sub nor the photos can be recovered currently. There's more lore to dig into via the computer in the back of the sub and a note left by a previous convict, like that the oceans are made of human blood and implying that the journey is doomed from the start. But that's outside the scope of the video. Today we're just talking about the vibes. This game was a short and simple experience, but so adept at building a tense atmosphere and using simple things like sounds, limited visibility, and unsettling images where you least expect it, to build an atmosphere of pure dread and suspense, with the ending just being the cherry on top. A short but very effective use of atmosphere in a nearly empty world. No Players Online is a short but extremely clever indie horror game that takes these concepts and feelings and runs with them. Styled after a retro first-person shooter with the simple goal of capturing the flag 3 times, it harkens back to the heyday of these kinds of games, but with the twist that you're the only person online. In fact, you might be the only person to have access to this world in general. In order to even get in-game, you have to enter the Konami code in the main menu screen, which is a neat little Easter egg. Once you do that, you pick a server and jump in. The ambience here is unsettlingly lonely, only hearing your footsteps, the wind, and a slight droning ambience in the background. It all makes for an almost melancholy feeling that this used to be a world that hosted parties of people having fun and playing, but is now desolate. There are no players online. You're alone here, or so it seems. After capturing the flag once, you begin to see something off in the distance, and a slightly distorted music begins to play. Capturing the flag twice causes the entity that you saw off in the distance to approach you in maybe the most uncanny manner possible. And on the final time back, we finally get somewhat of a hint of another person in this world. The developer of the game, who explains to us that the game we're in is his attempt at bringing his dead wife back to life, who is the creature that approached us earlier. He pleads with us not to deliver the final flag as it will release her soul, which is essentially trapped here. We can choose here to either leave or deliver the flag, which upon delivering, he kicks us from the game. As of the last update to the game, there's another possible ending that we can get. If we type haunt on the menu, it brings up a sound test menu. Entering a code there will disable collision with a certain area of the map, which if we fall out of it, we're teleported to one final flag, which ominously states that a replacement soul is required. We enter a code which opens the door to the flag. Stepping into the chamber, the game then cuts back to the menu, showing that all the servers are now full. The story it told was intriguing and left me wanting to know more. Because it's so vague, it leaves a lot up to the player to interpret, which I just think is neat. The game as a whole is an extremely simple experience that tapped into an extremely effective fear. Autophobia, or the fear of being alone. The quiet atmosphere that the game crafted was masterfully done, and made the parts where you do interact with other entities all the spookier. It might just be due to the setting of the game resonating with me personally, because I remember joining old empty TF2 or Gary's Mod maps back in the day, and it having an almost spooky feeling to it, like I'm not supposed to be here. And this game heavily reminded me of that. Either way, the atmosphere and concept of this one was just so unique and memorable that I had to talk about it for this video. Not every empty world has to necessarily be horror. Some can have an atmosphere that's more introspective or somber. Take for example the 2005 hit Shadow of the Colossus. Most of that game is traversal across an almost unpopulated landscape, which was actually an intentional decision. The plot is extremely vague and gives you very few answers, but the very basic premise of the game is you going around killing kaijus in order to resurrect a dead girl that you may or may not even know. Like I said, they don't give you a lot to go on. The Forbidden Land is this absolutely beautiful giant landscape with some ruins and remnants of ancient structures that are heavily overgrown and scattered throughout. Whatever was here before that created these landmarks is now gone, and that makes these ruins almost feel lonely. The area also has almost no inhabitants, barring the giant creatures that you're out to kill, so as you're traveling over this vast empty landscape, you have a lot of time to think. You have to wonder why you're killing the only living things in this place, especially since we as the player don't have any context for any of this. These guys are kind of just existing there, and you show up just to murder them. Even the music during most of these parts has a somber tone to it. Frustratingly, we never get any answers to most of these questions, but I wanted to briefly talk about it since this game as a whole is so unique, and the conscious decision to forego staple game design decisions like making more fun or intricate gameplay in order to craft a world like this just makes for an atmosphere that you don't see often, and one that I find very fascinating to talk about. Another good example is from one of my favorite games, Zelda Majora's Mask. The Zelda series as a whole, and specifically Majora's Mask, has a lot of moments like this actually, but the one I want to talk about here is in the final hours before the moon falls. Majora's Mask as a whole is one of the more somber titles in the series and has a lot of moments that reel back the action for a more quiet atmosphere. However, the final moments are really the most standout in terms of atmosphere. The hub area Clock Town, which usually has people to talk to, shops to visit, and dogs to pick up, all to the tune of some upbeat music, is almost entirely empty in the final hours. The streets, which should be full of people for this festival, are barren, with this large, ominously grimacing moon hovering just above, slowly creeping closer. Most of the residents decided to flee in an attempt to outrun the cataclysm, or bunker down in their homes or the bar and wait for the end. This alone would be somber enough, but it's accompanied by one of the best pieces of video game music to ever exist, which just elevates the doomed, hopeless feeling that the people of Termina must be feeling. Link can just reset the timeline whenever, so it doesn't have any impact on Link or the player, but for those people in that specific timeline, they're facing impending doom, powerless to stop it. So unless this boy wearing green tights can stop the floating genocide goblin, they're all doomed. And I think the last few hours and the emptiness of Clocktown in these final moments really embodies the feelings of these characters and the atmosphere of the game as a whole very well. I think as much as having tons of stuff in the environment to do can add to the atmosphere and world building of a game, the lack of them can be equally as beneficial, and in some cases like these, really do wonders for the mood or atmosphere of a world. I'm not saying in every case having empty map equal good atmosphere, but sometimes intentionally choosing to make a quieter experience can allow the player to heighten their focus on aspects that wouldn't otherwise stand out as much, and give people a newfound appreciation or new perspective on their favorite game. It can be a great way to tell stories through the environment, emphasize the design of a map, or make the player focus on a specific theme of the game. It can do all of these things without extraneous amounts of dialogue, a 4K hyper-realistic cutscene, or even holding players' hand and spoon-feeding them the story, and that's where I think the biggest strengths lie. So if you're like me and love hyper-analyzing this kind of stuff, the next time you find yourself wandering an abandoned area, take note of the sights and sounds around you, each crack in the wall, dead-end alleyway, or every spooky ambient noise in the distance, and just soak in the atmosphere of empty game worlds. Thanks for watching. Hey there, thank you for making it to the end of yet another one of my dumb videos. If you watched until now, I just want to say thank you. As always, liking and subscribing really helps the video and my channel out, so I'd appreciate that. Comments are great too. Do you guys have a favorite empty area in a video game? There's a lot I didn't mention, so comment your favorite below. In other news, I started a second channel, that'll be in the description. I don't know what I'm going to upload on it yet, but I wanted to make a place where I could infrequently upload various things I didn't want to put on the main channel. Think of it like a dumpster fire, but with sparklers in it. Also, I started a Patreon, no need to subscribe to that, but if you really like my content, you want to support me and the channel, you can check that out in the description as well. But I'm honestly just glad you guys are here watching this video. That's really what means the most. So once again, thank you for watching, have a good one, and I'll see you next time.